A man named Stuart Gander ran a small tuck shop in a low-income suburb of Harare. 60 years old, when his legs started giving out, he did what most Zimbabweans do when the body sends a warning. He ignored it. Because a doctor's visit cost money the shop was not making. By the time his family finally got him to a hospital, he needed a specialist. $600 for one consultation. They spent a month trying to raise it. He died while waiting. Here's the part that should stop you cold. Stuart's funeral was almost certainly fully covered. Paid up, sorted, dignified. The $600 consultation that might have kept him alive, not a cent. In this country, we will move heaven and earth to make sure you are buried well. Just don't get sick on the way there. That's not one family's bad luck. That's the system working exactly as designed. And today I want to show you that design. The money, the history, the culture, and the very human reasons it makes more sense than it should. There's a joke we Zimbabweans tell with a completely straight face. We are the best prepared people on earth to die, and just about the worst prepared to live. Like every good joke, it survives because it's true. And like every good joke, somebody eventually stops laughing. I am Tinashe. This is the Baobab Brief. Let's get into it. Here is why this is bigger than a sad statistic. The choice between a funeral cover and health cover is a tiny window into how an entire economy thinks, how people make decisions when the money is unreliable. The state is stretched paper thin, and culture is pulling hard in the opposite direction of the spreadsheet. If you want to understand Zimbabwe, don't read the GDP report. Watch what people protect with the last few dollars in their pocket. That is what tells you what a country actually believes about its own future. And this is not a uniquely Zimbabwean quirk like SADSA or a suspicious relationship with punctuality at weddings. Anywhere you find a struggling public health system, an unstable currency, and a strong culture of community ritual, you will find some version of this pattern. Zimbabwe just happens to run it at full volume with subtitles on. Let me give you the numbers because they are almost too tidy to be real. Among Zimbabweans who hold any insurance at all, roughly 72% have a funeral policy. Only 30% have health insurance. So even among the people who are already insurance believers, death cover beats health cover by more than 2 to 1. It's not a close race. It's not even the same sport. Zoom out to the whole country and it gets starker. About 90% of Zimbabweans, roughly 16 million people, have no health insurance whatsoever. Get sick and you pay cash on the spot like you're buying tomatoes. Part of the reason is almost comically simple. Health insurance here is mostly a workplace perk, skimmed quietly off a payslip. But fewer than 900,000 Zimbabweans are formally employed, under a million people, in a country of millions and millions. Everyone else is out in the informal economy, where there is no HR department gently sorting out your medical aid in between meetings. There's just you, a market stall, and hope. So picture it. A nation where the average person can tell you almost to the dollar what their own burial will cost, down to the coffin handles, but he has absolutely no idea how they will pay for 1 week in a hospital bed. We have priced death down to the decimal. Life, we just sort of left the price tag blank. Now the easy thing to do here is to wag a finger and say people have their priorities backwards. But hold that thought, because once you actually look at the math, it stops looking crazy and starts looking like the only sane option in the room. A private health plan worth having runs around $200 a month. In a country where most people live on a few dollars a day, that's not a line item, that's a fantasy. Filed somewhere between winning the lottery and the ZBC News starting on time. Now look at the other side of the ledger. Entry-level funeral cover starts well under $1 a month. We're comparing the price of a loaf of bread to the price of a small car payment. One of these fits in your pocket. The other requires a pocket you don't have. So when a mother is choosing between this month's rent and some abstract "what if I get sick someday," of course she takes the dollar policy. That's not foolishness. That's arithmetic wearing a brave face. There is a second reason, and this one gives Zimbabwe. We are a country that has watched its money evaporate more than once, like a soap opera that keeps killing off the same character and bringing them back under a different name. The Zimbabwe dollar, the US dollar, bond notes, now the ZiG. Our currency has more reboots than a superhero franchise, and about as much consistency. So imagine someone tells you a policy that promises your family a big pile of cash the day you die. You have learned the hard way that by the time anyone actually claims it, that big pile of cash might buy a loaf of bread and a strained smile from the cashier. Funeral cover sidesteps that entirely. It doesn't promise you a number, it promises you a thing, a coffin, a hearse, the tent, the groceries, the actual burial. As one policyholder put it, with the funeral cover, the value is seen, not imagined. In an economy where the numbers lie to you with a straight face, people buy the one product that can't be inflated away, because nobody ever managed to inflate a coffin. That's not superstition. That's financial wisdom and expensive way. And when there is demand like that, an industry shows up, a big, sleek, astonishing one, built with the quiet confidence of a business that knows its customer base is tragically permanent. Funeral assurance makes up the overwhelming majority of all life insurance revenue in Zimbabwe, about 74% in early 2025 according to the regulator. Nearly three-quarters of the entire life insurance business in this country is, in effect, the funeral business wearing a nicer suit. The undisputed king is a company called Nyaradzo. And here's the wild part. Nyaradzo writes funeral policies and literally nothing else, and at times has commanded around half of all life insurance revenue in the whole country. One company, one product, betting everything on the single most reliable outcome in human history, and winning. Its brand is Sawira, the trusted family friend, and it has gone all in on the culture. Grief counseling, coffins built in its own workshops, even a Sawira international plan that will fly your body home if you die. Think about that as a product pitch. Wherever you go, we will bring you home. For a nation with millions scattered across the diaspora, that's not morbid. That's the most comforting sentence a company can say to you. In second place is Dows, the granddaddy of the whole trade, bearing Zimbabweans since 1902. That company is older than most countries' airlines, older than the idea of a Zimbabwean passport, older than almost every institution you would assume was more permanent. Between just those two firms, you have got more than half the market. The top 5 players control around 84% of it. Death, it turns out, is one of the most reliable, consolidated businesses in the entire economy. So reliable that the regulator keeps nervously telling these companies, please diversify, maybe find a revenue stream that doesn't depend quite so heavily on people dying. It's the only industry where the sales team never has to worry about demand drying up. To understand why a coffin feels like a more natural thing to insure than a kidney, you have to go back about 100 years, because this industry did not fall from the sky, fully formed. With a marketing department, it grew out of something much older and much more human. The Burial Society. Call it the original mutual fund, minus the man in the suit, minus the fine print, minus anyone trying to upsell you. Rewind to colonial Rhodesia in the early 1900s. Black Zimbabweans were pushed to the very edges of the formal economy, and men were sent far from home to work in mines and cities, often across the border in South Africa, locked out of banks, locked out of pensions, locked out of almost every safety net. So they built their own. They pulled small monthly contributions so that if one of them died far from home, there would be money to carry the body back and bury him with dignity. No underwriter, no head office, just neighbors who decided collectively that nobody dies alone and unaccounted for on their watch. By 1919, migrant workers from Mozambique had already formed the Sena and Gazaland burial societies. By 1973, the city of Bulawayo alone had 248 registered burial societies, which for context is roughly one for every few streets. Scholars call these homeboy networks, little pieces of the village rebuilt inside a hard, unfamiliar city, held together by ritual and the simple fact of shared origin. So this is the DNA of the whole thing. Funeral cover in Zimbabwe was never a cold financial product bolted onto our culture like a spoiler on a family sedan. It's the great-grandchild of a mutual aid tradition that for a century was often the only dignity the system would let us have. And Nyaradzo's real genius was simply noticing that, packaging the warmth of the old burial society and selling it back to us with a logo. It shows up, it brings the groceries, it sits with the family, it does the human things the stiff old colonial insurers never bothered to. And then there's the culture itself, which, let's be honest, does not believe in small funerals. Never has, never will. A Zimbabwean send-off is a production, closer to the state visit than a private loss. The body, the all-night vigil, food for a crowd that somehow keeps growing the longer the night goes on. Like relatives are multiplying in the parking lot. The right coffin, not any coffin, the right one. The one people will discuss afterwards, the transport back to the rural home. I'll be honest with you, in Zimbabwe, it is genuinely easier to get away with a small wedding than a small funeral. You can elope, nobody elopes a burial. Because get it wrong, a cheap coffin, not enough food, and the whole community notices and files it away for later, the way an auditor files away a discrepancy. Researchers have a coder phrase for this. The co-funeral is one of the most underappreciated drivers of household poverty in Africa. The kind of expense that sends families to loan sharks or has them selling the fridge to cover the catering. A wedding you can quietly downsize. A funeral apparently is audited by the entire neighborhood. So when a Zimbabwean buys funeral cover, they are not being gloomy or obsessed with death. They are insuring against shame, against debt, against the unbearable thought of letting the family down in front of everyone they know. On the single worst day of their lives, frame it like that and it stops sounding morbid. It starts sounding like one of the most rational purchases a person could possibly make, right up there with locking your front door. But here's where I have to stop making jokes, because there's a cost to all of this, and it's measured in lives, not premiums. When we say a country is financially planning for death more carefully than for survival, that is not just a neat line for a podcast intro. It is a body count. And you already met one name on that list at the top of the show. Stuart Ganter's funeral was almost certainly fully paid for. The $600 consultation that might have saved his life was not. Read those sentences back to back and tell me insurance is just a numbers business. In this family, it was the difference between life and a headstone. And the system had already decided quietly which one it was better equipped to fund. So this is the part where someone always says, well, Zimbabweans should just prioritize health cover over funeral cover. And look, they're not wrong about the goal. A society that protects living people is healthier than one that simply perfects their burials. But I want us to be honest and gentle about the word should, because for most families, this was never a fair fight between two products on a shelf. One cost $1, the other cost $200. One hands you a guaranteed coffin, the other hands you a maybe. Blaming people for grabbing the dollar policy is like blaming a drowning person for reaching the life jacket that's actually within arm's reach, instead of swimming to the yacht they can see but can't afford the membership for. The real fix isn't a guilt trip. It's making the yacht affordable. It's a public health system that actually works, a health cover priced for people who earn a few dollars a day, not a few dollars a minute. The government has promised a national health insurance scheme. Whether a state wrestling with heavy debt, a shaky currency, and stubborn inflation can really deliver one, that's the open question of the decade. And here's the part that I genuinely love. That same instinct that built burial societies 100 years ago, it's stirring again. Some of these societies have quietly started to evolve, adding groceries, small loans, even money for clinic visits. Turns out the same people who organize themselves to handle death with dignity are more than capable of organizing themselves to handle life, One society secretary summed up the whole shift in one single sentence. She said, "We wanted dignity in death, now we're striving for it in life." That might be the most hopeful sentence in this entire story, because the obsession was never really with funerals, it was with dignity. That deep, stubborn refusal to let poverty have the last word over a person's life or their death. For 100 years, the only place we could reliably afford to buy that dignity was at the graveside. The quiet revolution worth watching is the one where we finally start demanding it for the living too. This has been the brief. If this one made you think or made you want to call your family, share it with someone and subscribe, because the next time we're heading somewhere else where the maps gloss over. Until then, look after the living.